Christians who reject evolution very often point to Romans 5, verses 12 to 21 as justification. But does that passage really conflict with evolution? In this video, we'll look at one of the arguments they make, that Romans 5:12 says there was no death before the fall, so therefore evolution cannot be true. Hey there, and welcome to the channel. We believe you can trust the Bible and accept evolution. Okay, let's start by looking at the Old Testament. I don't think this claim that there was no death of any kind before the fall is supported by the Old Testament at all. To begin with, it's hard to imagine an elephant or a large dinosaur never stepping on a bug before the fall, or a herbivore never eating an entire plant. But also, did God create the world so that bugs would never die? And bacteria wouldn't die either? The earth would quickly become uninhabitable, so that couldn't have been the plan. Well, maybe it was just animals and humans that were made immortal, but that's not scriptural either. Humans were made mortal, otherwise we wouldn't have needed access to the tree of life. So were animals made immortal while humans were made mortal? There's no indication of this in the Old Testament, and that wouldn't make sense. And anyway, lions have sharp teeth and they are not for eating grass. The closest that young earth creationists come in purporting to show that immortality is biblical is extending the terms good and very good in Genesis 1 to mean perfect. But surely this is a stretch and unwarranted by the text. And even if very good meant perfect, which it doesn't, why would a perfect world have no animal death? If that were the case, animal populations would explode and competition for resources would lead to lack of food. That's not perfect. Furthermore, the imposition of predation in the animal kingdom is not a part of the curse in Genesis 3. Okay, so lack of animal death is not found in the Old Testament. But not only that, it is contradicted by the Old Testament. For example, in extolling and praising God's good creation, Job 38 verses 39 to 41 praises God for providing prey for lions and ravens. In Psalm 104, which speaks of God's good creation, praises God for providing food for lions that roar for their prey. Also look at Genesis 1 verse 28, where God instructs humans to subdue the earth. In the Hebrew, the word subdue is a military term, invoking violence. The world was not intended to be completely idyllic. So now, as we go to our passage, we should be cautious of interpretations that do away with animal and human death before the fall. So let's go to Romans 5, verse 12. Therefore, just as sin entered the world through one man, and death through sin, and in this way death came to all people, because all sinned. So there are two things to say here. One, in this verse, Paul is not talking about animals. In fact, given he is setting up a contrast between two people, the first Adam and the second Adam, which is Jesus, and because the passage will talk about what Jesus did for people, it seems appropriate to assume that the verse is talking only about human death. Did Jesus come to die to save animals who put their faith in him? And actually, we see right in verse 12 that death came to all people, not all life. It reads, and death came to all people because all sinned. And anyway, animals don't sin. But second, that still leaves human death. Well, we have to consider whether the passage is talking about physical death or spiritual death. Remember from Genesis that humans were created mortal. And Paul himself in 1 Corinthians 15, verse 47, talks of Adam as being created mortal, being of the dust of the earth. So physical death would not have been the only result of the fall. And well, in addition to all that, we have the context of the broader passage, Romans 5, verses 12 to 21, where the concluding verse speaks of Jesus' actions bringing grace, justification, and eternal life. So a comparison in the passage is between, on the one hand, death, however defined, and on the other hand, spiritual life. The type of death in play here is thus most likely spiritual death to balance the comparison. Also note that in verse 12, we all die because we all sin. But physical death is baked in the cake genetically, even if we could, hypothetically, live a sinless life. So we will die physically whether we sin or not. So spiritual death is what is in play here. Furthermore, looking at the broader context in this section of the letter, see the very next chapter, even early in Romans 6, where Paul talks of death, and it is clearly spiritual death that is in play. And even in Genesis 3, which Paul is presumably referring to in Romans 5:12, while you could argue that physical death was a result of Adam's sin, and in a sense it was because he lost access to the tree of life, he did live a long time afterward. I think the death that God promised in Genesis 2, verse 17, saying that in the day you eat of it you will die, was spiritual death. And indeed, we see the immediate consequence of Adam's sin is spiritual death, as Adam and Eve were removed from the garden, from God's presence. So I think it is most likely that the death in chapter 5, verse 12 is spiritual death, separation from God, rather than physical death. So to summarize, Romans 5:12 does not say there was no physical death before the fall. It talks only about humans and emphasizes spiritual death. I hope this contributes to an important and much needed conversation, and I aim to produce a couple more videos on this passage. Until next time, God bless.